Good morning from a very sunny New Forest. A great improvement on yesterday morning, which was overcast and threatened to rain all day. Didn't deliver too much, I've got to say. So a bit more back garden botany in these times of self-isolation, and I thought that I'd talk today about one of the nation's favourite flowers. Yeah, it is of course primrose. And this little spread here I planted in my garden. Well, that's not entirely true. I planted some primroses in the garden a few years ago, and they have spread all the way up this bank. So let's start at the beginning. Primrose. How does it get its name? Well, prime, first. It's the first rose of the season. Primula is a scientific name which follows that as well, of course. Primula vulgaris is its full scientific name. Vulgaris meaning common. And it certainly was very common all over the UK. It is typically in gardens now, and since people have stopped planting it, that was forbidden with the Wildlife and Countryside Act back in the 1980s. It certainly grows very well. One place you can see it where there's little human interference are very often railway cuttings and motorway verges, which can be covered in primroses and its close relative, the cowslip, another one of the primula species. It's got these very characteristic, beautiful yellow flowers, and all yellow. I've got some pink ones in the garden, and I thought, oh dear, there's a cultivar that's come in there. But I understand from others who know more about these things than myself that those other varieties are in fact natural. Now the flowers, aside from being beautiful and trampled by exuberant young puppies, are what we call heterostylous. So they have a difference in their structure, and they come in two forms, pin and thrum. Now the pin are like these flowers here. You can just see the top of the style in there, the female part of the plant. And the thrum ones, which can occur on the same plant, I'm just looking around for one, can't see one at the moment. Ah yeah, one here, look, where you can see that the stamens are actually preeminent and visible. And the purpose of this is to prevent cross-pollination on the same plant. It's not uncommon in the plant world. The loosestrifes have this technique as well, and oh dear, they're relatively resistant to trampling, I have to say. But the question is, what does pollinate them? Well, you'll see insects of all kinds. I saw a honeybee from one of my feral hives over here on the flowers a moment ago. Bumblebees as well, of course, you'll see on them. I see a lot of little beetles in the flowers, actually, often covered with pollen. So maybe beetles are responsible for that as well. But the key thing is that if you are patient and you hang around primroses on a sunny morning like this, you might get to see one of Britain's most exciting insects. Frequently confused with a bee, but when you look carefully, distinctly different, is the bee fly. Now, it looks like a bee because it's fluffy and rotund, but typically the species that you see near primroses have a very long proboscis coming out, which they use to insert down into the nectaries of this flower, which are quite deep. And the neat thing about these bee flies is their rapid acceleration. They're a bit like hoverflies. They can zip and buzz about, but also, of course, their parasitic habits, because the female bee flies drop their eggs into the nests of solitary bees where the larvae are parasitic. And the process of this, which you should Google and watch online, there are on YouTube some films of this, is quite extraordinary. Not least because the female bee fly, before it lays its eggs into these tunnels where the solitary bees are, out here in the woods near my home, out there in the woods near your home, maybe even in your garden, then she goes down to some dry sandy soil, She collects that in a special chamber on her abdomen, and she uses that to coat the eggs so that they have a greater weight. And it's easier for her to hover, get this, yeah, hover and flick them into the nests of the solitary bee. So they don't land, crawl in and lay them, they hover outside and using their abdomen, they flick them into the nest. You've really got to see this. I advocate that you Google and enjoy. And this is all happening if you've got primroses, invariably, perhaps as I say, in your garden or the woods near you. What an insect. The Bombylidae, a very successful group actually. They parasitise not just solitary bees but other members of that species group, parasitise beetles as well, things like tiger beetles, and you do get to see these things very regularly. In fact, every year I get a few tweets from people saying, what on earth's this strange insect? Well, it's a bee fly, Bombylidae. Fantastic. Primroses, getting back to the primroses, yeah, very popular as a garden plant. They do well on pretty, well, they like sort of moist but well drained soil, not acid soils for sure. And these leaves are pretty much evergreen. They stay there throughout the course of the year, but they are another, like the lesser celandine that we were looking at yesterday, flower that likes to get all of its business done early in the spring before, in many instances, the leaf cover on the trees that grow around primroses close over and shade them out. Then these leaves become even more fleshy so that they can continue to gather what energy they can from the sun to replenish the plant supplies after the expensive exercise of flowering. One last thing, I've talked about how they're pollinated and their polymorphism in the flower structure. The question is, how do the seeds get dispersed? Well, believe it or not, they're dispersed by ants. Yeah. So how does a primrose get an ant to take its seed away? Well, these seeds are not unique. Many plants do use this technique, but on the outside of the seed there is a little bit of food for the ant. It's coated almost like a fruit rather than a seed. Not the whole seed, sometimes just a part of it has this little cap of food, which the ants realise is valuable to them, and they take them away into their nest. They feed their larvae on this food, on the seed, and then of course the seed is left to germinate. So this spread of primroses, which I've planted here, I planted one or two, and now, as you can see, they're all the way down this bank. This is all due to the work of ants. And there is no doubt at all, folks, that ants are better gardeners than I am. But when you've got ants on hand to help you, you don't really need a trowel or to be buying any more primroses. And that's the joy of nature. And that's the sort of thing that's happening in our back gardens or the green spaces that we can safely access during this period of crisis and fear and worry. You know, we can get into our gardens if we have them, or the local woods, keep social distancing, you know, in mind. Obviously wash your hands before and after you go out, but you can still sit down and engage with nature and find some of the most remarkable species literally right on your doorstep. Bee flies and ants spreading seeds. Britain's most popular wildflower, Primula vulgaris, the primrose. And I'll leave you this morning with the two puppies, Sid and Nancy, now 9 months old, dying to go out for their morning walk, and of course their training session, which will be rigorous, as at this point in time they're giving me the runaround, which is good for my physical exercise as well as my mental joy. Thanks very much. Tomorrow morning I've got one more species actually. Well, no, I've got a few more species, but I've got one species which, if it's sunny tomorrow morning, I can't wait to show you. It's another plant that I put in the garden. It's exquisitely beautiful, and when I was a kid it was a rarity that I always wanted to see. I didn't get to see it until I was in my mid-20s, but it now grows extremely well in my garden, and it could grow well in yours too. So until tomorrow, stay safe, and listen to all of the protocols that are being put out there on a daily basis. Okay, see you later. Got to deal with the poodles.